Okay, well, thanks so much for being here tonight. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thanks for that kind introduction, Brian. Just a little bit about myself. I'm the regional coordinator for the Mountain West for Citizens Climate Lobby. So I'm supporting volunteers in 7 states: Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada. And I also ran for federal office a few times, and Brian asked if I could share a bit about my experiences as a candidate as well. So I'll mix that in with my work with Citizens Climate Lobby. A little bit of background about myself. I grew up in rural Vermont, and I came out west. I thought I'd come out for a ski season. That was 1990. And I ended up at Alta and worked there for a number of years. My favorite job there was on the ski patrol. I also was one of the deputy marshals in the town of Alta. And then I wanted to see how far I could expand myself. So I worked on creating my own business and started a small picture frame shop from scratch out of employee housing in Alta. And then moved downtown and carried that business downtown. And then I'll get a little bit more into the history there, but I became a carpenter later on, and then got involved with climate advocacy work. So I'd like to share this photo just because this is my home down in Salt Lake City, and I really try to live my life in ways that are with a goal to try to use less. And that's why I've gotten solar finally. I put lighter tiles, roof tiles on my roof to try to reflect more of the heat. I try to use less water, and all the things that we all, I think, probably in this room try to do to use less. But I feel that it's also very important that we try to look towards things that we can do on a larger scale. And that's what I'll be talking about here today. So Mark, next slide. I have to say, Mark, next slide. So you're going to hear that a lot because we had a little issue with Zoom. So for some reason, I couldn't get the two to function for me. So tonight's focus, one of the priorities here is just having a conversation about the importance of normalizing the conversation around climate. And this is something that's really kind of the fundamental step here, is that it's really important that we are out there and having conversations around this issue, because it's through conversations that we can move forward. And what I'll try to share with you is how there's certain techniques that I've learned through the work that I do that really helps in trying to have that opportunity to communicate in can be a very difficult topic. I'm going to also talk about my transformation really personally, from just an average guy who became a climate advocate in a way that I really never had imagined that I would ever do. And then finally, I'd like to talk about a bit about the economics around solutions to addressing the climate issue and how people can be in action. Next slide. So I started, I talked about it a little bit at first. I started a picture frame shop in employee housing back in 1997 as I was ski patrolling. And I like to joke that it was the only ski and ski out frame shop in the world. My dream really was to find a way to make a living through landscape photography. And it led to me creating Wasatch Frame Shop, which after 7 years, it didn't survive the economic downturn. Although I'd like to say it was because I didn't charge enough for my work. But in the process, I just completely lost my passion for working in this business, because I found myself doing less of my landscape photography and more just trying to pay the bills and framing, and it lost that part for me. But through the process, I really found myself really becoming more and more concerned about the impacts of climate and how things were changing. You know, my experience in Alta, seeing how the seasons were shortening. And it's kind of funny to be talking about shortened seasons when we have like the mega year of all time here, as we would say in the mountains this year. But it's something that, consistently speaking, things are shifting in a direction that is concerning. But I, you know, is really concerned about how our, you know, how our planet was being impacted. And as I did the landscape photography, I really started to, you know, think about how I could maybe give back to nature, as it had given so much to me over the years, and really have felt like I had had an amazing experience throughout my life growing up in rural Vermont, and then being in the mountains in the Wasatch, and really wanted to find a way to give back. And then I started a nonprofit. It was called Renewable Energy Resources. And that was designed to help facilitate ways for individuals to become energy efficient and utilize renewable energy. And in the process of preparing and setting up to become a nonprofit, I saw a presentation by Bill Barron, and he talked about the goal of how we needed to stay within 350 parts per million in order for our planet to sustain itself. It hit me hard. It made me realize that, you know, the problem that I'm trying to make a contribution to is so big that helping individuals, to me, was something that you know, I wasn't, I needed to figure out how I could make a larger contribution. And that led me to getting involved with Citizens Climate Lobby. I will talk a bit more about that as we move on. So let's go to the next slide, Mark. Okay, so first of all, when I talk about normalizing the conversation around climate, I like to share this slide because I think it's really important to really consider what the perspectives around climate are across our country. And the organization called Yale Program on Climate Change Communication classifies the 6 Americas. And as you'll see here, it goes from can't see, alarmed to dismissive. And what we're seeing here is that, you know, we're happy to share that, you know, the segment that's alarmed has grown in percentage from 18% to 30% between 2017 and 2021. While the dismissive segment has trended downward from 11% to 9%. So really, we are seeing a shift in a positive way, but what this is trying to elevate in the conversation is that, you know, there's a lot of different perspectives around climate, and you know, that's something that we have to deal with as we try to help you know, build more support for action on climate. Next slide. So this is sort of where I would like to just touch on some really important parts that I've found in my experience of having conversations around climate, is that, you know, everyone has their own view, and it's coming from their own sources and their own information. And it's not necessarily fair for us to, you know, say we're right, they're wrong, whatever we and whatever they are. So it's really important, I think, in having conversations with people, to really start out by listening to where they're coming from. Whether you agree with them or not, it's important that people are honored for their views and that they can be felt that they have been heard. And so that's something that I have found to be a really critical point to work from, so that by listening, it creates the opportunity to really honor their views, but also to, through that, you typically can find common ground if you're in a situation where somebody has differing views from you, because ultimately the goal of communication in this area is that we want to be, finding a way to move forward on this issue and have conversations so that change can happen. And if you're sitting there and saying, no, my view is right because I have this data, and the other person is saying their view is right because of that data, it really doesn't give that opportunity to connect. And I think that it's also really important to, from that common ground, it creates a relationship and a sense of mutual respect that is really important, I think, in order to build and grow, each of us grow in understanding somebody else's perspective, as well as being able to share your own. I also think that, I'm making an assumption that my audience tonight is probably more on the progressive side of things, but I wouldn't say I don't know for sure. But the point that I would like to make is that whether you're progressive or conservative, I think that the point to be made about the economics around clean energy and a transition to clean energy is a way to, if you are on the progressive side, it's a great way to communicate, to try to help bring people along who may not be as convinced that climate change is an issue, because we can always be debating how much, climate change is impacting our world. But, the data and the information that we can get as far as the economics go can speak for themselves. And it's a way, if you're progressive, that you can help communicate the message that who cares about climate change? There's actually an economic argument that you can use to help move the conversation and create a forward movement on climate. Next slide. So I like to say, my true passion has been in the outdoors. I grew up in rural Vermont. It was sort of a deal growing up as a kid where you would, your mom would say, see you when it gets dark. And you would go off and run in the woods, and, it wasn't any threat or anything to really worry about unless there was some wildlife in the area. And from that experience, I really, it instilled a deep appreciation for nature and being outdoors and wildlife. And I carried that as I came out west. I'd like to say when I spent my years in Alta, 10 years full-time in Alta, we always used to say we're living the dream, and that we would be out there and enjoying the beautiful outdoors. And yet I also learned a great deal of humility in Alta and the power of nature. I came across this photo skiing, and I remarked on the ski pole that I have in my hand in that shot, because I lost that shot, or that ski pole, in an avalanche that I was caught in while ski patrolling. And I remember the experience. It was a really intense experience. And I ended up getting flipped forward, face first down the hill. And I saw two sets of trees coming at me before I went under the snow. And I had time to think, I'm either going to die or I'm going to break my back. And I ended up going through a set of trees that were about 3 feet apart head first. Ripped my skis off in the first set of trees. I went through another set of trees and ended up buried to my waist. And the adrenaline was amazingly intense. But it was really interesting because as I went back to collect my gear, the second set of trees I went through, my ski hat and my goggles were placed on I say placed, they were sitting on one of the branches that was 6 feet off the ground where I was in the debris. And it was as if somebody had put it there. And I mean, you know, I'm not a religious man. And I felt very religious at the time. And it made me think about that as I continue to do this work in climate and running as a candidate. There were times certainly where I felt like I was spared to have the opportunity to do the work that I do on climate. And now here I am. I like to say I've turned into a desk jockey. I spend a lot of my time working on the computer and doing Zoom meetings since COVID is been you know, the technique that we do is being on the computer a lot. And because I cover a region that's so large, a lot of my meetings are done virtually. So I spend a lot of time there, and I feel like I was given this opportunity to do this important work from a very lucky experience that I had. Next slide. So this is an interesting shift that happened for me, because after I, you know, I had created my nonprofit, and I was doing presentations on how people could become more energy efficient and utilize renewable energy. And then I saw the presentation by Bill McKibben about the 350 parts per million, and that was something that was an ultimate goal that we should be striving to achieve. And you know, I realized that the work that I was doing, I wanted to try to find ways that I could be working on systemic solutions. And so as part of my nonprofit, I was doing presentations down at the Salt Lake City Library. And I chose to do a presentation talking about cap and trade versus carbon pricing, which is two different approaches through legislation that helps reduce carbon emissions. And I won't go into all the details of how those work at this time, but in the process of doing the research for this presentation, I learned about Citizens Climate Lobby and their focus on carbon pricing. And I was also really drawn to Citizens Climate Lobby's approach to how they did the work. Through relationship building, being respectful, being nonpartisan, and many other things that I'll talk about a little later. But I did this presentation talking about carbon pricing, and through the Google search, I found Citizens Climate Lobby. And a couple of days later, I got a call by the founder of Citizens Climate Lobby, and he was asking me if this was in May. He asked me if I would go to DC, Washington, DC, to lobby my members of Congress on this issue. And, you know, I'm a shy guy. You know, I had to come a long way to even present in front of crowds that the way I have had to do over the last number of years. And you know, I got the call. I was a carpenter at the time, paying the bills and doing my advocacy work, trying to get my nonprofit off the ground. And he asked me, and I remember I got the call, and I'm on the job site. There's no walls. We just have framing. And I walk into the other room, which is, you know, the guys can still see me on the phone on the other side of the house. And he asked me if I would go to DC, and I was terrified. And then I thought, you know, if I really am going to stand for what I believe in, I've got to go. And I said, okay, I'll go. And I remember I got the tickets, and, you know, at the time, going to DC for me was like the only time I'd have off for the whole year. And so here I was going to a place that I really didn't want to spend time in, and being really uncomfortable doing what I was going to do. And I was all for it because it seemed like the right thing to do for me. This photo here on the left there is, that's the first lobby group for Citizens Climate Lobby back in 2010. in Washington. And that was 20, there were 25 of us that year. Now we are a volunteer organization of 210,000 volunteers. So lots of growth over the years. But this is the morning my first ever experienced lobbying. I stayed at a youth hostel. Did we just lose?
No,
Okay. I remember the night before lobbying, I was going to lobby Senator Hatch's office, and I was sitting in front of the youth hostel trying to memorize my talking points and trying to be ready for this meeting. And it was just a really interesting experience for me. And I went into that first meeting in Senator Hatch's office, and there were 5 of us, 5 volunteers from across the country in the meeting. And, you know, I'm holding my notes for what I'm supposed to say. And my hand was shaking so much that I couldn't even read it. But we went into this boardroom, and it was this, I mean, this is Senator Hatch. He was he was pretty top dog in DC at the time. And we were in this boardroom with, like, I remember there were 15 or so leather chairs, and we were sitting having this conversation. And at the time, this is back in 2010, and people, they didn't, at the time, climate was really not a part of the conversation. It was more in the denial phase at the time. And yet I came out of that meeting and I was like, this is exactly what we need to be doing. We need to be, as citizens, speaking up for what we believe in and what's important, and talking with the people who are making the decisions. And it was a life-changing experience for me. This is my daughter, who bared with my passion for trying to do all this climate work, and also provided the inspiration for the work that I do, because I certainly want to make the world a better place for not just her, but coming generations. And I found that this was what I thought was the way to do it. And so I came back from Washington, DC, and I realized that this is the work that I wanted to focus on. Next slide, please. So when I returned, I was like, I was a maniac. How can I find ways to, raise the issue of climate? How can I get more people to be talking about it? How can we get to that 350 parts per million in the time that we really need to? And so I was doing things that were way out of my comfort zone. I was meeting with the editorial board of the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret News. With the executive director would come in from CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, and join me in these meetings. And I was tabling, trying to get more volunteers involved, a tabling crew of 1, just trying to get more people involved. I was writing letters to the editor. I was doing whatever I could. And I thought about, how can I have more influence? How can I have more of a conversation around this? And I mentioned that I'm originally from Vermont, and a friend of mine told me about a movie that was filmed it was a satire of a dairy farmer who runs for office to bring attention to an issue. And it was Frank Tuttle, the dairy farmer, and the title of the movie was A Man with a Plan. And I thought, maybe running for office might be a way to bring attention to this issue. And aside from the satire and the joking about it, what I was thinking about it was, this is an opportunity to stand for what I believe in a way that, is how I really felt. But it also was a way to get a lot of exposure on the issue, because if you run as a candidate, you will, certainly get attention on who you are and what you're about, because people want to know what a candidate is all about. So I decided I would run as a single issue candidate to bring attention to the issue. And I made the decision, but before I went for it, I talked to my daughter about it, and I said, I am, not likely I'm gonna win here. However, I need to be ready, because if that actually happens, I would have to go to DC, which was not my first choice, but something that I would be willing to do for the importance of the issue. And I just said, I wanted, to ask you how you felt about that. And she was 7 at the time, in that note making phase that those kids have, and so she walked into her room and she wrote me this note, and I said, okay, I'm in. And so with that, I decided to dream big and try to bring attention to this issue as a single issue climate candidate. And it was a life-changing experience. Once again, how many can you have in a life? Well, I feel like I've had a few. Next slide. So, like I said, one of the reasons why I ran as a candidate is because it was a way to bring attention to the issue. No one was talking about it. And this, as a candidate, I would go to candidate events. I remember one in Skyline where I was running against Senator Hatch for US Senate in 2012. And, standing in front of what seemed to be probably 200 or so people and saying why I was running as a single issue candidate on the issue of climate change, and having just no reaction from any faces in the audience. And meanwhile, my heart was beating so hard, I swear I could see my chest bouncing in front of me. But the thing that was really powerful about the experience for me was that, I was able to use these campaigns as a way to bring attention to, the issue, but also get publicity. So the idea was how this is a way to get attention. For instance, as a candidate, as a single issue, unaffiliated candidate, you still get the opportunity to put a blurb in the voter information packet, which is seen by 1 million people. And I talked about my concern for climate. I talked about the importance of carbon pricing as an approach to address this issue. And it was a real effective way to bring attention to the issue, getting newspaper articles of coverage. A lot of the papers offered opportunities for candidates to share their views on things. And I would just use these over and over again to talk about climate. And it was a really, special experience for me. And I think the caption here, Mother Earth as a candidate for Senate, was the one that really felt good to me. I felt like, hey, I'm really doing this for Mother Earth, and that's how it's always felt for me. So that's what I thought was a really good way to bring attention to the issue. Next slide. So along these campaigns, what I decided was, how can I do something unique to bring attention? And a friend of mine mentioned Wayne Owens. I don't know if you remember Wayne Owens, but he ran for Congress in Utah's 2nd district. And in 1972, Wayne Owens walked the district, meeting people one-on-one, having conversations with folks. And he unseated the incumbent with 55% of the vote, walking the district. And for me at the time, I was like, walking the district sounds great, but I don't have time. I can't take time off to walk the district. How about bike the district? So at the time I was running for Senate, but I chose to decide that I could use a bike campaign as a way to do something unique, hopefully bring more attention to what I was doing, cover the state by bicycle. And, it's something, my passion has always been cycling, and I thought how neat it would be to stand for what I believe in and while I'm doing something that I love. And it was a really interesting experience to be out on the bike, and to be honest, it's easier for me to talk in front of a bunch of folks or campaign after getting a good few hours or more of bike riding in to calm my nerves. So it really worked well. So that was what led me to do these bike campaigns every time I ran for office. So I ran in 2012 against Hatch, 2014 for Congress against Chris Stewart, and 16 against Mike Lee. And every time I would do a bike campaign as a way it had kind of become my MO. And it was a neat opportunity to continue the messaging that I had kind of developed over time. Next slide. So, usually you don't tally up the number of votes you get over all the campaigns, but this is a unique campaign. So what I really was trying to do with this work was to say, we are these people that voted were voting for the issue. It wasn't for the individual, and that's always the way I wanted it to be, was that it was an opportunity for people to use their vote to send a message. And I wouldn't have chosen this route if it was, say, a tight race, and that the person who was more concerned about climate would be threatened by me running. In the cases of all these races, I knew that what I was doing wasn't going to have an impact on the outcome, but my ideal was to try to get 10% of the vote as a way to, that was the percentage that came out for the first Earth Day, which created a lot of changes in our country. And so I thought, if I can get 10% of the vote, that would be great. I never attained the 10%, but I never gave up as well. Next slide. And to be honest, I had grander ambitions. I was trying to see if I could get other people to run for office and do the same thing across the country, thinking that, if we had a number of people running for office in this way, it would probably get a lot of national attention. But, it's not for everyone to run for office and do it this way, and didn't really have any takers. So, but the goal was, always to try to bring more attention to the issue around climate. Next slide. So this is, I ran 3 times for office, federal office, and then in 2016, 2020, I became full-time with Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a nonpartisan organization. And so I would no longer choose to run for office, because being nonpartisan, we didn't want to threaten anything of the work that we were doing as a staffer on this issue. So in September of 2022, I did what we called the Utah Energy Freedom Tour. And this is repeating a tour that I did in 2014, going back to the same towns and having conversations and really seeing how the conversation has changed. And what I found is that a lot of the conversation has changed, but it hasn't changed everywhere. And so here are some photos. The top left, that's a panel discussion we had in Kanab, and that was with panelists that included a county commissioner, a water commissioner, and a city council member. It's amazing to me that, after these years, when I first went through these areas, there was very little attention in the local political positions and offices. And now the conversation has changed to the point where people want to talk about it, and we want to try to find solutions, not just at the local level, but to be talking about how we can do solutions for the region and beyond. The photo in the bottom right is that's St. George. We had 125 people attend that event, panel discussion. We had the mayor of Islands, city council member. We had former Congressman Bob Inglis, who's a Republican who leads an eco-right group, which is called Republic EN, which is focused on advocating for climate solutions that can appeal to conservatives. And so he also, Bob Inglis, joined on the bike campaign and rode 3 days with me along the way. We had meetings with the Rotary clubs in St. George and Cedar City. The tour included meeting with county commissioners in 4 different counties along the way, having conversations about how they were seeing climate being, or I should say, clean energy projects being developed, and really having an interest in growth in that area. But we also had areas that were challenging. Panguitch was one of my stops, and I'll say that their views are certainly in doubt of the fact that climate is changing and what's causing it. We also found that in areas of, for instance, in the western part of the state, Milford, Delta, Tooele, we didn't have any contacts out there. We tried to do events, we set up events, but we had no shows. So, there's still areas that are challenging, but by and large, it was in a lot of shifts were seen from this same route that I did in 2014 to now in 2022, or last year in 2022. So it was exciting to see that these changes are happening. Certainly, I think that we probably feel like it'd be nice if it was happening a little quicker. But the fact that these things are happening is forward movement, and it's something to be appreciated. Next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit about CCL's values, Citizens Climate Lobby. I'll call it CCL. That's what we do as a habit. So when I talk about CCL, that's what I'm speaking about, Citizens Climate Lobby. And these values really carried me not just as a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby and motivated me to be a part of the organization, but it was also, to me, a way of living that I also carried into all my efforts as a candidate, which is to have the focus, to be optimistic, really try to build relationships with people, even if you don't necessarily see eye to eye, because through those relationships, you can grow into a deeper conversation. Having integrity, personal power, being involved and advocating for something that you believe in the different ways that CCL offers is a very, for me, it's been a very powerful experience, and something that has been challenging, but very enjoyable as well. Then being nonpartisan, it's critical. In order for us to have durable solutions, we need to have nonpartisan approaches to things, because if you try to move things through in a partisan way, it just creates a divisiveness that makes it even harder to move forward. And of course, diversity, bringing in people of all flavors and interests and focuses together. Next slide. Oh, sorry, hang on. Oh, thanks, Mark. And I'd like to talk quickly about our 5 levers of political will, which Citizens Climate Lobby focuses on, and that's lobbying, volunteer lobbying. It's media relations, so that's working on writing letters to the editor, op-eds, that sort of thing. Grassroots outreach, grass tops outreach, and chapter development. And grass tops outreach, I just want to share a quick story with Brian here. Brian has been involved with CCL over the years, and he and I lobbied Ski Utah to try to get a support and an endorsement for carbon pricing. I don't know what year that was, years and years ago. And the story goes that eventually they did. And to the point where then the president of Ski Utah joined myself and a Snow Sports Industries of America staffer who had also supported carbon pricing in a meeting with the US ski team, in a meeting that we asked to host. And now the US ski team supported carbon pricing. So it's building off of these experiences, these relationships over time really can generate some great successes. So, the Grass Talks also includes working to get municipal resolutions passed supporting carbon pricing is what we've been focusing on as an organization for years. We've broadened our focus a little bit, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. But all these areas are designed to influence and create change. And when the organization was really small, we would all try to do all 5 of these levers as individuals. And now, as we've grown, what we want to do is try to encourage people to choose the area that most resonates for them and to help out in the way that they really would enjoy if they're so inclined to be involved. Next slide. Yep, so, just real briefly, these are the things, again, that I think CCL is really good about is, again, having respect, appreciation, gratitude. All these things are really critical in how you can develop a relationship and holding optimism. I think that there's a tendency to be discouraged around this topic. I like to believe that if you can hold optimism for what's possible, it creates more space for it to actually happen. Because if you don't believe it's going to happen, it's a lot harder to work on it. And so change is really benefits from optimism. And so that's something that I think is key. It's something that my dad is really a very optimistic guy. And I try to carry that optimism into this work because it makes it easier to do it, and it makes it a really valuable experience. Next slide. So I just want to talk a bit about CCL's impact in Utah. CCL in Utah has done a lot of outreach. We have an amazing team across the state, and Utah is seen as what is termed by Bob Inglis, the conservative Republican congressman that joined me on the bike tour, as a head turner state. And a head turner state being that we are a red state. We're not on the ocean. We don't have any coastal areas where the sea level rise is going to show its greatest impact. And so the fact that a lot of successes are happening in Utah, and we have some actual great support on things regarding clean energy and climate by our members of Congress, shows that if we can, move Utah has the potential to move the country. And so these are things that in this collage here, you'll see we have had lots of activities in many different ways. We've had 25 Republican legislators at the state level sign on to an op-ed supporting carbon pricing. We had a resolution passed by students at the state level, an environmental resolution that basically says climate change is happening, and that we need to do something about it. And all these things are shifts that are happening that are really valuable and key in moving the conversation along. We also, through the resolution, it led to the state legislature putting funding towards a study that was done that was called the Utah's Roadmap. And in the roadmap, it makes suggestions on how we can develop clean energy and address climate. One of those is to put a price on carbon emissions and return revenue to households, suggest that at the federal level, which is again something that Citizens Climate Lobby's been advocating for many years. And then we have Representative Curtis, who's your congressman here in the 3rd district, and he started the Conservative Climate Caucus in the House for Republicans only. There's 70 members in that caucus. And the fact that there are 70 conservatives, the conservatives have not had as strong of a view on climate, and what he's done really successfully is to create the opportunity to bring conservatives in the House along on this issue, which is important. It's, certainly there's a desire for, faster movement on this issue, but you can't move quickly if you don't get started. And sometimes the first steps are the hardest, and the fact that he has 70 members on that committee, or excuse me, on that caucus is a very powerful thing that is happening in the House. He also had a conservative climate summit in Salt Lake City in October of 2022. He went to the COP 27 and 28, which is the conference of parties where they are, working on addressing climate at the global level. So Senator Romney has also been outspoken about the importance of using carbon pricing as a tool to address climate. So there's a lot of really amazing movement that's happening in Utah. And it's something to be proud of as a state, and to really think about appreciating them for what they are doing. I mean, and try to avoid criticizing them if you feel like they're not doing enough, because if you demonize somebody for not doing enough, it's a lot harder for them to do anything. So, and think about it yourself. If somebody says, "Hey, you're wrong at what you're saying," it makes it hard to feel good about wanting to talk to that person. So appreciating what they are doing is really, really important. Next slide. It's also important to have fun while doing this work, and here's a couple actions that I just wanted to share. And this is a hike. Representative Curtis goes on a hike with our CCL volunteers every year now. 2 years ago, we hiked from Alta, starting and going over Grizzly Gulch over onto this side by the lakes, and then back up over Catherine's Pass, back to Alta, and to have the whole day hiking with a congressman and having conversations about climate, and having atmospheric scientists and professors and a lot of people that can help provide input in a respectful way. It has an impact. This year, this is a hike that happened in 2022 in the Uintas, and it's just amazing to have these opportunities that are happening, but having fun doing it too. We also are in the parade in Park City every year now. So we have I try to have a fun time doing this work too, because this work can be challenging, and having a good time doing it is really important. Next slide. So you can see here, you can read for yourself. These are some of the numbers as far as how many supporters we have in Utah right now, and this is for 2022. You'll see how many lobby meetings, media publications, contacts with legislators, and outreach events. So what we try to do is we try to keep track of how much outreach we're doing as a barometer to see how our members of Congress are responding. These photos that you see here, bottom left there, that's the 2013. There were 3 of us who went to DC from Utah, And then the image to the right is 2016, where I think we had about 15 people. And in 2019, right before COVID, in our last lobby effort in person, there were 25, which was the same number as the total number of people who lobbied from the whole country in 2010. So it was really exciting to see how much growth has happened nationally, as well as what's happening here in Utah. Next slide. So here's a sense of what the size of the organization is. We are 210,000 strong. We have 70 employees. I'm one of 70. I'm the only employee in the Mountain West region. And so we really rely on supporting volunteers and empowering them to do this advocacy work. You can see the numbers of meetings, letters to the editor, and so on. So lots of growth. We're really excited about what the future holds, because this is a team that's grown and is working together in a collaborative way to influence the conversation in DC. Next slide. Just want to touch on the, as you know, we just passed the Inflation Reduction Act. This graph shows how much investment there is in clean energy. And what you'll see there is that the Inflation Reduction Act was the largest bill that passed in US history on climate, but it's not the only bill. There are other things that have been passed. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the partisan thing. It was through reconciliation, partisan. It ruffles feathers on the other party to push something, jam something through by the other party. And, both parties are guilty of doing this whenever the party is in power, which is unfortunate, but that's the way it goes. But the reality of it is that this money is available, and it's trying to encourage the fact that we need to make the most of this money. But the thing that I wanted to highlight in this image is that this is the CHIPS Act and the Infrastructure Bill in combination. All three of these bills combine to form a coordinated strategic policy to accelerate the transition. And together they are very powerful, and it's something to be really excited about. The CHIPS Act, which is in there, is that was a bipartisan bill, and the infrastructure bill was bipartisan. So it's not as if this is all of the money that's being put into clean energy is coming from the partisan Inflation Reduction Act. And there's a huge amount of money that's going into that. And so that's, that happened in 2022. Next slide. And this graph is the last year is 2020, as you can see, and you can see where things were trending before this money hit, in the last year. And what you saw here is that the coal it's not competitive anymore, and that nuclear is level, climbing a little bit. Renewables is on its way up, and this is before the money came out. All the money that's been put into the system, and so I just wanted to share this with you because there's an economic point to be made here, which is that things are changing. It's exciting, and that we're already moving in the right direction. It doesn't mean that we just sit on our hands and it's going to work out, but it's something to be happy about and to appreciate. And now it's trying to make the most of the funding that's coming our way. Next slide. Here we have this is the global investment in energy transition. And basically what I'm trying to share here is, you can see this again is 2022, and you see the amount of growth in electrified heat and clean energy. The change is happening, and it's just we need to, not let go of the sight of what's possible, and we still need to be advocating for solutions that can even accelerate this even more. But the discouragement that some may feel about the situation we're in, I think, can be, seeing the economics around it. We really are in a moment where change is happening, and it's something to be excited about. Next slide. Okay, so here I just wanted to cover a few things. This is data from 2020. New data will be coming out in, 2022. New data will be coming out in March. So this data doesn't include all the growth that's happened in the last year. But what you'll see here is that the coal-fired power plants, the cost per kilowatt per megawatt hour is much higher than the clean energy, as well as wind and solar. So the price point for all the clean energy is lower than for coal. This is the supercritical coal, is the most efficient coal systems in place right now. The combined cycle is high efficiency natural gas energy production. So the numbers don't lie. We've come to a point where clean energy is less expensive than fossil fuels. And it's something that we should be really excited about. These technologies, this is where you can ramp up energy in a fast way to meet demand when there's peaking going on. And this combustion turbine cost is, it's been going down incrementally as they make improvements, but the battery storage price is pretty much on parity. It's actually a little less, and the technology is improving so quickly that there is, for instance, batteries are 50 to 70% less expensive than they were, and so essentially there's going to be even a bigger gap between this combustion turbine energy production and battery storage. So we're really headed in the right direction. It's just really, important that we don't let up on how important our work is. Next slide, please. So here you'll see, I think it's really important, we can demonize the fossil fuel industry, and then we shouldn't. We wouldn't be where we are today as a country if we hadn't used the fossil fuels that we've already used. And there's, communities, I'll be in Wyoming tomorrow having talks, and their livelihood relies on fossil fuels, and we should appreciate what we've been able to accomplish with it. It's just the reality is we can't do it anymore, and we need to transition away for it. This is a quote from Representative Scott Peters: "Climate action is about building things, not stopping things." So the challenges that we face are really the development of clean energy, and that's something that we'll talk about here in just a moment. But it's exciting. New wind and solar is less expensive than the operating cost of existing coal plants. So what that means is a coal plant that's already been built and generating power costs more than building solar and wind and running it. So that's huge. The investment in low carbon energy reached parity. There's $1 trillion investment in clean energy technology. There's also $1 trillion that's spent in fossil fuels, and so the fossil fuels are declining and the clean energy is climbing. So we're really seeing this transition. And I think what we want to try to be saying in our messages is that there is opportunity here, and that it's not like we have to, live on nuts and berries to survive, but that there's a lot of opportunity that we have ahead of us through clean energy and that production. Next slide. So this is I just wanted to touch on these are the 4 areas that Citizens Climate Lobby is focused on now. We originally were focused specifically on carbon pricing, which is a market-based approach. You price carbon emissions, you collect all the money and you give it back to households. So everyone would get a dividend check, and what that would do is it would offset their increased costs that they would see in their homes through the money that they would receive. And it creates basically you're putting a price on pollution, and by doing this, you are incentivizing and accelerating the transition away from using fossil fuels. But because of the inflation that we're seeing and the war in Ukraine, and the fact that we just passed a huge spending bill on climate, it's not really a strategic time to focus completely on that one topic. It's something we still include in our advocacy, but we also have added these other policy areas. Clean energy permitting form is that's really important. Right now, there's 230 gigawatts of renewables, but with the Inflation Reduction Act, it creates a capacity of having 740 gigawatts, and that has to happen by 2030. And so what that means is that, right now our transmission development is 1% per year. And that's the average over the last decade. We need to increase that transmission to 2.4% a year to hit our climate targets. And if we do not get this permitting reform in a way that we can accelerate, what it means is that we lose 80% of the opportunity the IRA has with improved transmission. So it's not about the permitting reform is not about removing environmental regulation. It's about speeding up the process of permitting, which is really slow right now. Building electrification and efficiency, it's a no-brainer, really. The energy that's used to drive heat pumps and other efficient energy sources for your homes is 4 times more efficient than using fossil fuel devices. So these are things that really we want to be advocating for. And right now, the thing that we all can be doing in the clean energy or the building electrification area is to make use of the incentives that have come out of the Inflation Reduction Act. They're still kind of ironing them out, but the thing that is possible is for people to make their contribution by getting to, when they need a new vehicle, to look to an electric vehicle. When they need a new furnace, go for a heat pump, and find the electric efficient systems that you can improve not just your own lives, but use less fossil fuels. Even up until we transition completely to clean energy, fossil fuel electricity being run on a higher efficient electric energies or a heat source is going to be more efficient than even with fossil fuels. So there's a lot of opportunity here, and I just really encourage you to think about how you can contribute in the electrification area. Healthy forests, that's where we're talking about planting trees. The trillion trees is one of the areas that the previous administration talked about, and that's something, planting more trees. Of course, I think trees, they're going to burn down because of forest fires. So it's also about tree stand management. That tends to be a good way to find common ground with some folks, is to think about how forests can be managed better so that they're protected from fires and also grow and improve on forests. So those are the 4 areas that we're focused on. And Mark, we're going to skip the next slide. We've already talked about it. Just real quickly, I talked about carbon pricing. The power of carbon pricing is that We as a country are way more efficient in how we produce products that are carbon intensive, steel, aluminum, fertilizer, things that use a lot of energy to create. And because our manufacturing is among the cleanest in the world, a carbon border adjustment is a part of a carbon price. That is a really powerful tool. And this is something that, the US is way more competitive on this than other countries. So this is something that could appeal to more conservative folks in that it basically penalizes countries that are less efficient through a carbon price that has border carbon adjustments. And I'll go into more detail here after this talk ends if you want to learn more about this, but essentially this border carbon adjustment is an opportunity to advocate for something that is good for our country because we are efficient in how we produce our products compared to other countries, with a few exceptions. But it's something that is appealing to the audiences that have been difficult to move along in the conservative space. Next slide. Okay, just wanted to touch again on, I mentioned Representative Curtis has the Conservative Climate Caucus. This is the agenda. This is the big one here to me, is let America build. It's an opportunity to build in areas that we really need to. And if we don't do this area and development, then other countries are going to just take advantage of this opportunity because the demand is there. And it's up to our country to step into that. Next slide. Okay, I know Brian talked about an hour and a half for this. I'm an hour 15, and I know all my CCL friends are like, you went over an hour, and that's way too long. So I appreciate you being patient about this conversation. I just want to invite all of you, if you're interested in learning more about Citizens Climate Lobby, it's a very volunteer-based group of passionate people who really want to do good. And this is I have some flyers I can share with you if you're interested. It's citizensclimatelobby.org. And through this organization, what I would recommend is that if you are interested in learning more, we have an info session, and it's available every Wednesday night where you can look into the details of what the organization offers. And I invite you to join in this great community of people. I've been involved with Citizens Climate Lobby for 13 years, and the people that I have met through this work, and the passion and the relationships and friendships that I've found in this work has been amazing. And I couldn't encourage it more. And I'd love to talk to you more if you would like to about it individually. And again, I just want to thank the Brighton Institute and Brian for inviting me to talk with you all. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
It's Bill. We have a microphone. If you have questions, yes, you do.
I do. Yeah, I have something. Hi, I'm Carolyn Marie. I live up in Brighton here. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Let me just check to be sure. Mark, can Carolyn be heard on Zoom?
Hello, hello.
Yes, we can hear.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great. So, you were talking about the economics of coal, and what brought to mind was the fact that recently there's been some news about some coal-fired plants in Utah that the state of Utah is attempting to defend them against the EPA, and is spending our taxpayer money to sort of give them a pass. But every time we do that, that essentially makes the coal-fired plant, it's like propping it up economically if it doesn't have to abide by EPA's rules for clean energy. So I just wanted to hear your comments.
Yeah, we have heard that, and certainly that is concerning that they would do that. And I'll just say that's it's in appropriations, so that it's really hard to track where that conversation is being held. But if something like that happened, or the EPA was going to make it harder for a coal-fired power plant to do that, then the coal-fired power plant would just shut down, because they're nearing the end of their life cycle anyway. And so they're not gonna, they're not going to keep them open. So I can't really give you much more of an answer except to say that we're aware of it. The legislature is probably not going to do anything to, fight that. But in the big picture, I think we should look back at the fact that coal is, you saw the trend in the graph. It's not going to last long, and it's because the cost of clean energy has dropped so much. There's no desire to keep going with coal. So it's something that it'll be interesting to see. We can't really see where it's headed, because it's kind of tucked away in appropriations. It's not specific legislation. So to be continued. But I think the reality is that, coal is on its way out and everyone sees it. And if it's, when it boils down to money, you're going to go with what's less expensive, and what's less expensive now is clean energy. And so this might be a short prop, but it's not going to last.
I'll let somebody else. Go ahead.
I'll bring it over down.
Thank you. Thank you for your very informative discussion tonight. There was one bullet point that I really had a big question about, and that was the one that said the cost is less of building and running wind and solar plants. That is less than the cost of fossil fuel plants. But I wondered if that is controlled by the amount of energy produced by each part of the statement.
I'm just getting this out of a report in a paper that was it's written in Hill, which is a publication in DC, where they quote the fact that they've done the calculations, and the expense of running a coal-fired power plant just operationally is more expensive than wind or solar. There's one power plant in Wyoming so it's 99% are less expensive. There's one power plant in in Wyoming that competes, but if they tried to recreate that plant now, it would cost more to do it. And I have the link to the article that I can share with you, where I can show it on the screen, or try to show it on the screen.
I just give you my email, so you can send it later.
Bill, can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
So, but your question was, does that matter, I think, or does the amount of energy produced from each matter? So that's looking at cost per kilowatt hour compared for all of those technologies. So it doesn't matter how much is produced, right? It's per kilowatt hour.
No, so that's great. That's a great argument. I just wanted to make sure. I have several friends who are denying energy for climate change, and I invited one to come tonight. Should have known better, because I wonder what you say when someone is like, we had the ice ages and then they melted. I mean, climate change has been going on for millennia, and that for political reasons, groups are trying to, close down fossil fuels, plants and blah, blah, blah. And I think you got a good point that we should try to have calm discussions about this. But if someone says that to you, what would your response be?
I think now I would just use the statement that clean energy is less expensive. So why would we want to use energy that's more expensive, that puts carbon into the atmosphere, whether you believe that climate change is happening or not? I mean,
Well, that's true. That's
yeah,
good.
I mean, I think that there's the 6 Americas that I talked about earlier on in the presentation. There's the dismissive folks. There's some folks where I've been in conversations where just a certain point they'll argue everything that I want to share with them, and I'll just say, I really appreciate your position on that. I don't see it that way, and I hope you have a great night. I mean, there's certain folks that it's not worth the heartache to try to convince. But I think there's a lot of, we don't need to get the dismissive people on board. We need to get the people that are not sure, that are on the fence, more than we need the people on the edges. And so I think that, people who are reasonable, and maybe I'm making a judgment, but I think that people that's why I like the economic argument. It's like,
Yes.
you're not even putting the climate in the topic. You're just talking about clean energy, and that it's, whether you like it or not, it's cheaper.
Yeah.
So why would you want to, use more expensive fuel that puts carbon in the atmosphere, heat trapping carbon? Right?
It's a jobs creator too.
Just jumping over that point, I can hear an argument from some, other people where they would say, the wind and solar could now replace coal. And what would you say to that? I mean, we wouldn't be able to build enough capability to replace coal. I hope that's not true. But how long would it take if everybody decided coal was a bad idea, and let's go all in on wind and solar? How long would it take to replace the energy generated with coal?
Yeah, that's a good, it depends, right? You hear that terrible word, it depends. But I mean, you think about like coal-fired power plants. In Wyoming, they're doing a test on modular nuclear, where they're siting it on where a coal-fired power plant is, because the transmission's there. So there's a way to create these transitions and put energy where coal is going to go away. But as far as I think what you were kind of saying there is, well, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, but coal creates this baseload power. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah,
And so you have, first of all, I talked about how the cost of batteries are going down, and battery can cover that base load, while wind and sun are not as favorable at that time. And just the simple development of clean energy at a certain magnitude will provide the energy that can be transported in places where it's needed to cover that problem. Mark,
Bill, can I add?
Yeah, I was ready for you. Come on, man, help me out.
So let me explain that the reason I'm jumping all over this, right? I'm retired, but I spent 30 years in electrical generation, the first part in fossil fuels and the second part in renewables. So the issue, if you're looking at one wind turbine or one solar array, it's a problem, right? Because that one wind turbine is only going to blow when the wind's blowing, and the solar array is only going to provide power when the sun's shining. But if you spread that over a grid, and let's say Western State Grid, which there already is one, we already share power all the way from Montana to San Diego. Then it's a much less of an issue because the wind's going to be blowing somewhere and the sun's going to be shining somewhere. And actually, if you mix the two on almost a 50% mix, it has a much lower variability factor, meaning if the wind's blowing, it's likely going to be cloudy, and so you're not going to get sun. But if the sun's shining, you might not have as much wind. But if you mix them together, then you're always going to have some power. So you do have to have some balancing source of generation, but it's nowhere near as what people claim if it's only on a single turbine or a single solar array. I don't know if I was helpful or not, but that's my response.
We're getting nods, Mark, so thank you.
Yep.
See, it's nice to have a guy with 30 years of experience. I'm just a carpenter, you know? Yes, let's get the mic over there.
Thank you, Brian. Is Utah making any progress in reducing the number of unhealthy days?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't have that area of focus. You know, we're working on trying to move federally mainly. As far as clean air days, that would be something that I would probably go to Utah Clean Energy or HEAL. Utah might know that data. Mark, do you have any data on that?
I don't have specific data. I have an antidote, and so the quick answer is if you look at the last 3 years, absolutely yes, Utah has had less unhealthy days, but that is probably due to the pandemic and less cars on the road.
Anyone else? Oh, we got one more here, I think.
I just wanted to make a comment that California has that energy credit that you were talking about. They were currently doing that. There's tax credit for people based on them charging for carbon.
Oh yeah, they're doing cap and trade approach.
Okay.
It's not a carbon price. So cap and trade is it's, in our opinion, it's a little less preferred because you have to choose the cap. And if the cap is not like the cap on how much emissions can occur, and then the trading involved to make it so that if you are going to be over the cap, you can trade to stay below your cap. This is for industry. That is definitely effective, but what we've always advocated for is called carbon fee and dividends. So it's a price per ton of carbon emitted when the fuel is burned. So it's very direct and transparent. There's no guesswork because it's just tied directly to how much emissions will be created when it's burned. And that can be calculated for as finely as different grades of coal. So it's not as vague. And the other issue with cap and trade is there's also carbon credits you can buy to trade with, which are keep under your cap, and they're hard to verify. So some company can say, oh yeah, we're doing a carbon credit by planting this forest for reducing emissions, and it's hard to verify that they're not doing it for maybe another purpose and double dipping on it. So it's a lot more direct and transparent to use a carbon price than it is to do cap and trade.
All right, so follow-up question then is, so do you think the California one is an earnest effort, or do you think it's just like tokenism?
Oh, no, I think it's an earnest effort. Definitely. I mean, it's, like I said, it's not our necessarily preferred route, but it's getting the job done to a certain degree, and you know, California is leading the way in so many ways in clean energy, that that's a part of it for sure.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Bill?
thank you. Well, thanks, everybody on Zoom. Mark, you're my savior. Appreciate your help.
You're welcome.
Over and out.